My name is Ralph Anderson, and at 68 years old, I never thought I would be burying Martha, my wife of 45 years. The funeral was unbearable enough until I overheard my daughter-in-law, Stephanie, on her phone behind the chapel. Her words cut deeper than my grief. Once the inheritance clears, I am putting the old man in a nursing home. We will finally get everything. Martha always said Stephanie was trouble, but I never imagined she would plan my end while pretending to comfort me. Let me know where you are watching from, hit subscribe, and prepare for the truth about what happens when family sees you as nothing but a wallet. I met Martha back in 1975 at the Sunshine Diner on Maple Street. I was 20 years old, working construction during the day and taking night classes at the community college. Martha was the prettiest waitress there, with auburn hair that caught the morning light and a smile that made every customer feel like the most important person in the room. She was saving up for nursing school, working double shifts, and still somehow maintaining that genuine warmth that made everyone love her. I became a regular at that diner, not for the food, which was decent enough, but for those few minutes of conversation with Martha. It took me 3 months to work up the courage to ask her out. When I finally did, she laughed and said, "I was wondering how long it would take you." Our first date was a picnic by Miller Lake. I packed sandwiches and lemonade, and we talked until the stars came out. 6 months later, I proposed on that same spot. We were young and had nothing but dreams and determination, but somehow that felt like enough. We started our life together in a tiny one-bedroom apartment while I continued working construction. Martha finished nursing school and got a job at the local hospital. We saved every penny we could. After 5 years of marriage, I had learned enough about the construction business to start my own company. Anderson Construction began with just me and 2 other guys I trusted from my previous job. Martha was my backbone during those early years. She kept her nursing job to make sure we had steady income while the business grew. On weekends, she would help me with the paperwork and bookkeeping. Even after long shifts at the hospital, she never complained about the extra hours. "We are building something together," she would say. "This is our future." 7 years into our marriage, we were blessed with our son, James. Martha cut back to part-time nursing to care for him, but she still found time to help with the business. By then, Anderson Construction had grown to 15 employees and a solid reputation in our community. We were able to buy a 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood with good schools. James was the light of our lives. Smart, kind, curious about everything. Martha and I agreed that education would be our priority for him. We started a college fund when he was still in diapers. Martha read to him every night, and as he grew, we made sure he had access to books, museums, science camps, anything that would feed his curious mind. As James entered high school, it became clear he had inherited his mother's compassion and my work ethic. He graduated valedictorian and got accepted to several prestigious universities. We were so proud when he chose to pursue law. "I want to help people," he told us, "like you and Mom have always done." Martha and I had built the construction business into something substantial by then. We had 30 employees, contracts throughout the state, and a reputation for quality and integrity. The business allowed us to pay for James's education without him taking on debt, something we had always dreamed of doing. James thrived in law school. It was during his 2nd year that he met Stephanie Blake. She was beautiful, ambitious, also studying law. The first time he brought her home, Martha and I were impressed by her poise and intelligence. She asked thoughtful questions about our business and seemed genuinely interested in our family. "She seems perfect for James," I told Martha that night after they left. Martha smiled and nodded, but there was something reserved in her response. "She is certainly accomplished," was all she said. As James and Stephanie's relationship grew serious, Martha and I started thinking about our own future. The business was doing well, and we had invested wisely over the years. We began making retirement plans, dreaming of traveling to all the places we had been too busy building our life to visit. Martha wanted to see Italy, to visit the small town her grandparents had come from. I wanted to take an RV across the country, seeing national parks and small towns at our own pace. James and Stephanie got married in a beautiful ceremony after they both passed the bar exam. They looked so happy, so full of promise. Martha wore blue and danced with me under the stars at their reception. "We did good, Ralph," she whispered. "Our boy is set for a wonderful life." 2 years ago, everything changed. Martha went for her annual checkup and came home quiet and pale. The doctor had found something concerning. Tests confirmed the worst: pancreatic cancer, already advanced. Martha faced her diagnosis with the same grace and strength she had shown throughout our life together. "I have had 43 wonderful years with you, Ralph," she told me. "That is more blessing than many people get in a lifetime." The next 18 months were a blur of treatments, hospital stays, brief rallies that gave us hope, followed by declines that crushed it. James came home as often as he could. Stephanie came less frequently, always with an excuse about work demands at her law firm. Through it all, Martha remained herself. Even on her worst days, she asked about the grandchildren of our longtime employees, remembered birthdays, insisted I keep up with my friends. "Life is for the living, Ralph," she would say. "You need to keep living yours." In her final months, Martha seemed preoccupied with legal matters. She asked to speak privately with our family attorney several times. When I asked her about it, she just smiled and said she wanted to make sure everything was in order. Just tying up loose ends, nothing for you to worry about. Martha passed peacefully on a Tuesday morning in April. James was there. Stephanie arrived 2 hours later, apologizing about traffic. I held Martha's hand as she took her last breath, thanking her for our life together and promising to be okay. It was the first lie I had ever told her. I had no idea how I would be okay without her. The days after her death passed in a fog of grief and arrangements. James handled many of the details, for which I was grateful. Stephanie took charge of the funeral planning, something that surprised me given how little time she had spent with Martha during her illness. "I want to do this for James," she explained, "and for you, Ralph." I felt like half of me had been torn away. Martha and I had been partners in everything for 45 years. Every decision, every joy, every hardship had been shared. Now I was alone in the house filled with her touches, her choices, the life we had built together. I never imagined that my grief was about to be compounded by betrayal, or that Martha, even in death, was still looking out for me. The day of Martha's funeral arrived with perfect blue skies, the kind she always appreciated. "God showing off," she would have said. I had chosen her favorite church for the service, the one where we had attended Christmas Eve services for decades, and where James had been baptized. Martha had always loved the stained glass windows there, how they painted the pews with colors when the sun hit them just right. I had selected her oak casket personally, remembering how she had always appreciated the beauty of natural wood. She was dressed in the blue dress she had worn to our 40th anniversary dinner, her hands folded over a small bouquet of daisies, her favorite flowers for their simple beauty. Around her neck was the silver locket I had given her on our first anniversary, with tiny pictures of me and James inside. The church filled quickly. Martha had touched many lives through her years of nursing, her volunteer work at the literacy center after retirement, and the genuine interest she took in everyone she met. Our employees came with their families. Her former nursing colleagues arrived in groups, sharing quiet stories of her compassion. Neighbors, friends from our travel club, even the young man who delivered our groceries when Martha became too weak to shop, they all came to honor her. James sat beside me in the front pew, his face drawn with grief. Stephanie sat on his other side, dressed impeccably in a black designer suit that seemed more appropriate for a corporate meeting than a funeral. Throughout the service, I noticed her checking her phone discreetly, her expression more impatient than sorrowful. She dabbed at her eyes occasionally, but I never saw actual tears. Several people spoke about Martha. Her nursing supervisor talked about her dedication to patients. Our oldest friend Bill recalled our early days and Martha's unfailing generosity. James spoke last, his voice breaking as he talked about his mother's strength and the lessons she had taught him about compassion and integrity. After the service, we proceeded to the cemetery for a brief graveside ceremony. The spring sun warmed my shoulders as I placed a single red rose on Martha's casket before it was lowered into the ground. The finality of that moment nearly broke me. James put his arm around my shoulders, and we stood together in shared grief. The reception was held in the church hall. Martha would have approved of the simple, elegant spread. She never liked fuss. Friends approached me with hugs, stories, and offers of support. I went through the motions of accepting condolences, but inside I felt hollow, as if I were watching someone else go through these rituals of mourning. After about an hour of handshakes and memories, I needed a moment alone. I slipped away from the reception and found a quiet corridor that led to the church gardens. I just wanted a few minutes to breathe, without having to acknowledge another sympathetic face or respond to another well-meaning platitude. As I approached the garden door, I heard Stephanie's voice coming from around the corner. She was speaking in a hushed but excited tone that immediately caught my attention. I paused, not intending to eavesdrop, but something in her voice made me stop. "The service is finally over," she was saying. "God, these things drag on forever." Everyone acting like she was a saint. There was a pause as she listened to whoever was on the other end of the call. "No, I cannot just ask him about it today, Denise. I have to play the grieving daughter-in-law for at least a few weeks. But do not worry. I have already started mentioning retirement communities to James. We need to speed up the inheritance process now that she is gone." My blood turned cold as I stood frozen in the hallway. "The old construction business is worth millions," Stephanie continued. "And the house is in a prime location. Once we get Ralph into a nursing home, we can sell everything. I am thinking 3 months, tops, before I am putting the old man in assisted living. James will not fight it if I frame it as concern for his father." She laughed at something the person on the other line said. "I know. Can you believe our luck? The beach house we saw in Malibu will definitely be within reach. And I have had my eye on that new Mercedes SUV. Ralph has no idea what is coming. These old people are so trusting." I must have made some small sound, because Stephanie suddenly went quiet. I quickly moved toward the garden door, as if I had just entered the hallway. When Stephanie rounded the corner, she nearly bumped into me. "Oh, Ralph." Her face registered momentary panic before smoothing into practiced concern. "Are you okay? Do you need to sit down?" "Just getting some air," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the earthquake happening inside me. "It is a lot to take in today." "Of course." She nodded, touching my arm with perfectly manicured fingers. "It is so difficult, but James and I are here for you. Whatever you need." The words that just minutes ago might have comforted me now turned my stomach. I nodded mutely and continued toward the garden, needing escape more desperately than before. In the church garden, I sat on a stone bench beneath a flowering dogwood tree. Martha had loved dogwoods. My hands were shaking as the full impact of what I had overheard settled into my consciousness. My daughter-in-law was actively plotting to put me away, to strip me of my home, my business, my independence, everything Martha and I had built together over a lifetime. My mind reeled with questions. Did James know? Was he part of this plan? The James I raised could never be so callous. But people change. Love blinds. Perhaps Stephanie had convinced him this was for my own good. I sat in that garden for 20 minutes, trying to compose myself enough to return to the reception. When I finally did, I viewed everything through new eyes. I watched Stephanie work the room, accepting condolences with practiced grace, one hand always on James, as if to demonstrate their unity. I saw her appraise the value of the simple gold cross Martha had donated to the church years ago. I noticed how she steered conversations with our wealthier friends toward business opportunities rather than memories of Martha. How had I missed this? Had grief blinded me to her true nature, or had she always been this way, and I had simply refused to see it? The ride home from the funeral was torture. James insisted on driving me, with Stephanie in the passenger seat chatting about practical matters we should start considering. The house seemed to watch her with suspicion now, as she walked through the front door, suggesting which of Martha's clothes should be donated first. That night, after James and Stephanie had gone to their hotel, I sat alone in the living room Martha had decorated with such care. Her reading chair sat empty across from mine, her half-finished novel still on the side table with her glasses folded neatly on top. The betrayal I felt burned alongside my grief, creating a pain so acute I could barely breathe through it. "What do I do now, Martha?" I whispered to the empty room. "How do I fight this without losing our son?" For the first time since her diagnosis, I allowed myself to weep without restraint, for all I had lost and all that was still at risk. As the initial shock of Stephanie's phone conversation wore off, memories began to surface. Small moments I had dismissed or rationalized over the years. Like water dripping on stone, these recollections gradually carved a clearer picture of the woman my son had married. There was the Christmas 5 years ago, when Stephanie had opened the handcrafted jewelry box Martha had given her. "How unique," she had said, setting it aside quickly to ask James if he had kept the receipt for the designer bag he had bought her. Martha had spent months working with a local artisan to create that box, selecting the woods and inlays herself. Then there was Martha's 65th birthday celebration. James had wanted to take us all to her favorite restaurant, but Stephanie had pushed for a more upscale place where she mentioned a partner from her firm might be dining that night. When Martha, already feeling unwell from her early treatments, asked if they could go somewhere quieter, Stephanie had sighed audibly before acquiescing. During Martha's illness, Stephanie's visits had been brief and infrequent. She always had a reason, a case that needed attention, a client in crisis. When she did visit, she spent much of the time on her phone in another room. Once, I overheard her telling someone that terminal illness is such a downer and laughing softly afterwards. Martha never complained about Stephanie's behavior. "James loves her," she would say when I mentioned Stephanie's absence, "and that is what matters." But there had been moments when I caught Martha watching Stephanie with a careful, assessing gaze I should have paid more attention to. Most telling was an incident just 3 months before Martha passed. Stephanie had visited briefly and, thinking Martha was asleep, had suggested to James that they might want to start thinking about what to do with the house after. James had been appalled. "Mom is still fighting," he had said firmly. "This is not the time to discuss such things." Stephanie had backed off immediately, but not before I saw the calculating look in her eyes. I had attributed these moments to differences in personality, to Stephanie's career-focused mindset versus our more family-oriented values. I had made excuses for her behavior because she was James's choice, and Martha and I had raised him to make good choices. Now, with Stephanie's true intentions revealed, these memories took on a sinister cast. She had been evaluating our assets, positioning herself, waiting for the right moment all along. Within days of the funeral, Stephanie's campaign began in earnest. She and James came by the house daily, ostensibly to check on me. Stephanie brought containers of food I never saw her prepare, and certainly never saw her eat, commenting on how I should not have to worry about cooking at a time like this. During these visits, Stephanie would casually mention friends whose parents had found such peace in retirement communities. "They have everything taken care of for them," she would say brightly. "No home maintenance, prepared meals, built-in social activities." James seemed to accept these comments at face value, nodding along, and occasionally adding, "We just want you to be comfortable, Dad." I played along, thanking them for their concern while watching Stephanie like a hawk. After they would leave, I often found evidence of her snooping. A desk drawer, not quite closed. File folders in my home office slightly rearranged. The cabinet where Martha and I kept important documents showing signs of having been searched. About 2 weeks after the funeral, I noticed that some of Martha's jewelry was missing. Nothing extremely valuable, but personal pieces that had meaning. Her mother's pearl earrings, a silver bracelet I had given her on our 25th anniversary. When I mentioned this to James on the phone, he sounded genuinely confused and concerned. "Are you sure, Dad? Maybe Mom moved them before she got sick? Or they could have been misplaced during all the activity around the funeral." "Maybe," I conceded, not wanting to voice my suspicions yet. "I will keep looking." The next time Stephanie and James visited, I pretended to nap in my recliner while they moved around the house. Through slitted eyes, I watched Stephanie open Martha's jewelry box and slip something into her pocket when James went to the kitchen. Later, after they left, I confirmed that Martha's small diamond pendant was now missing. My suspicions grew when I overheard a conversation between James and Stephanie on the porch as they were leaving one evening. I had gone to retrieve my reading glasses from the car and paused when I heard my name. "I think we need to give Dad more time," James was saying. "He is still grieving." "Time is exactly what we do not have," Stephanie replied, her voice tight. "You know how quickly elderly people decline after losing a spouse. It would be irresponsible of us not to have a plan in place. The Sunrise Valley Retirement Home has a 6-month waiting list. We need to get him on it now. He is only 68, Steph, and he is in good health. For now. But that could change quickly. You are too emotionally involved to see this clearly. Trust me. As someone who has handled estate planning, getting him settled sooner rather than later is the responsible choice." Their voices faded as they walked to their car. I stood frozen by my own vehicle, the manipulation in Stephanie's voice so obvious now that I wondered how James could not hear it. The next day, I discovered my business financial records had been accessed on my home computer. I had never logged out of my password manager, not thinking I needed to secure my files from family. The folders containing information about the company's value, contracts, and assets had all been opened recently. That same week, I received a call from Bill, my neighbor of 20 years and one of my closest friends. "Ralph, something odd happened, and I thought you should know," he said. "Stephanie stopped by yesterday, asking questions about your daily routine. She wanted to know if I had noticed any confusion or unusual behavior from you lately. She mentioned something about early dementia running in your family." My blood ran cold. "There is no dementia in my family, Bill." "I did not think so," he replied. She also asked if I would be willing to sign a statement about changes I had observed in you since Martha's passing. I told her I had not seen any changes beyond normal grief. "Thank you for telling me," I said. My suspicions now fully confirmed. Stephanie was building a case for my incompetence. That night, I could not sleep. I paced the house Martha and I had shared for 30 years, feeling like a prisoner awaiting sentencing. In my office, I found myself staring at the photos on the wall, the history of our life together. Martha and me at the grand opening of Anderson Construction's first real office, James's college graduation, our 30th anniversary trip to Alaska. In one photo, taken just a year before her diagnosis, Martha was looking not at the camera but at me, her expression one of such love and protectiveness that it made my heart ache anew. "I miss you," I whispered to her image. "I do not know how to fight this without you." As if in answer, my gaze fell on the business card tucked into the frame of our wedding photo. Susan Williams, attorney at law. I had forgotten about the card Martha had placed there months ago, saying simply, "Just in case you ever need her." At the time, I had assumed she meant for business matters. Now, I wondered if Martha had seen what I had been blind to all along. Had she been trying to protect me even then? The next morning, I called the number on the card, setting in motion a chain of events that would reveal just how prescient my wife had been. The offices of Williams Legal Services were located in a converted Victorian house downtown, away from the gleaming high-rises where firms like Stephanie's conducted business. The waiting room featured comfortable furniture, local artwork, and fresh flowers in simple vases. It felt welcoming rather than intimidating, which I suspected was by design. Susan Williams herself was a surprise. I had expected someone Martha's age or older, but Susan appeared to be in her early 40s, with short practical hair and a warm, direct manner. She greeted me with a firm handshake and genuine sympathy about Martha's passing. "Martha spoke of you often, and with great affection. she said as she led me to her office. I was very sorry to hear of her death. She was a remarkable woman. I settled into the chair across from her desk, confused. You knew Martha well? I do not recall her mentioning you. Susan's expression softened. Martha came to see me about 18 months ago, shortly after her diagnosis. She asked that I not mention our meetings to you at that time. She had some concerns she wanted to address privately. My confusion deepened. Martha and I had always handled legal matters together, through James's friend from law school who had become our family attorney. Why would she seek outside counsel without telling me? Mr. Anderson, Ralph, Susan continued. Martha suspected that your daughter-in-law might have ulterior motives regarding your family's assets. She came to me because she wanted objective advice from someone with no connection to your family or social circle. The confirmation that Martha had shared my now obvious concerns about Stephanie was both validating and painful. Why hadn't she told me? As if reading my thoughts, Susan opened a folder on her desk. Martha left this letter for you. I think it might answer some of your questions. She handed me an envelope with my name, written in Martha's neat handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. My dearest Ralph, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and something has happened to make you seek out Susan Williams. I hope I am wrong about why you might need her, but my instincts tell me I am not. From the first time I met Stephanie, something about her struck me as false. It was nothing I could prove, just small moments of calculation I glimpsed when she thought no one was watching. The way she assessed our home, asked probing questions about the business, steered James towards certain decisions. I never shared these concerns with you because I had no proof, only intuition. You have always seen the best in people, Ralph. It is one of the things I love most about you. I did not want to come between you and James with mere suspicions, especially if I turned out to be wrong. But as my illness progressed, Stephanie's mask slipped more frequently. I overheard conversations. I noticed documents moved in your office. I saw how she looked at our possessions, like items on an inventory list. I began documenting these incidents, keeping a journal of dates, times, and exactly what I observed. I have given this journal to Susan for safekeeping, along with recordings I managed to make of some troubling conversations. Most importantly, I have modified our will with some special provisions that Susan will explain. These changes do not affect what we are leaving to James, but they do create safeguards that will protect you if Stephanie attempts to take control of our assets or force you into any living situation against your will. I know this letter may come as a shock. I am so sorry for not sharing these concerns with you while I could. I told myself I was protecting you from unnecessary worry during an already difficult time, but perhaps I was being a coward, afraid of creating conflict when I had so little time left. Please know that everything I have done has been out of love for you and for James. I hope Susan never has to show you this letter. I hope Stephanie proves me wrong. But if not, know that I am still watching out for you, my love, as I always have. Forever yours, Martha. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. The letter was so unmistakably Martha, practical, even in her concern, thinking ahead, protecting those she loved. I could almost hear her voice speaking the words. She kept a journal? I asked Susan, once I had composed myself. Susan nodded and produced a small leather-bound notebook from the folder. Martha documented numerous incidents over the past 2 years. She was very methodical. I opened the journal to find pages of Martha's handwriting, detailing conversations she had overheard, strange behavior she had noticed, and her growing concerns about Stephanie's influence over James. April 3rd. Overheard S telling someone on the phone that she married into a gold mine when Jay stepped outside. When he returned, she quickly changed her tone. June 15th. Found S in our home office looking through business files when she thought I was resting. When questioned, she claimed to be looking for family photos for a surprise project for Jay. September 8th. S suggested to Jay that they should be added to the business accounts in case anything happens suddenly. Jay seemed uncomfortable, but did not directly refuse. Reading these entries was like discovering a parallel narrative running alongside the last 2 years of our life together. While I had been focused on Martha's health and making her comfortable, she had been quietly standing guard, protecting our future. Martha also recorded several conversations, Susan said, indicating a USB drive on her desk. Would you like to hear them? I nodded, though part of me dreaded what I might learn. Susan inserted the drive into her computer and played the first file. Martha's voice, already weakened by illness, asked casual questions about future plans. Stephanie's responses, unguarded because she thought Martha was too sick to pose any threat, were chilling in their calculation. Of course we will take care of Ralph. Stephanie's voice purred from the speakers. There are excellent facilities where he will have everything he needs. The house is really too much for one person anyway, especially at his age, and the business should probably be sold to professionals who can maintain its value. James and I have already discussed options. In the background, I could hear James protesting weakly. We have not decided anything, Steph. Dad is perfectly capable of making his own decisions. Of course he is, honey, Stephanie had responded, in a tone one might use with a child. But grief can affect judgment. We need to be prepared to step in. Susan stopped the recording. There are several more like this. Martha was very thorough in building her case. I sat back, feeling oddly relieved, despite the disturbing content. Martha had seen through Stephanie from the beginning. She had not been fooled, and more importantly, she had taken action. So what exactly did Martha do to the will? I asked. Susan straightened in her chair, shifting to a more professional demeanor. Martha created what we call a springing, irrevocable trust, with several specific conditions. The majority of your shared assets, including the business and property, have been placed in this trust. The key provisions are these, she continued. First, you remain in complete control of all assets during your lifetime, as long as you are mentally competent, which you clearly are. Second, if anyone, particularly Stephanie, attempts to have you declared incompetent or forces you into any care facility against your will, control of the assets does not pass to James, as would normally happen. What happens instead? I asked. Instead, the assets would be managed by a trust committee consisting of yourself, as long as you are able, along with 2 longtime business associates Martha selected, whom she felt could not be manipulated by Stephanie. James would still receive income from the trust, but would have no control over the principal. Susan leaned forward, her expression serious. And there is one more provision Martha insisted upon. If Stephanie makes any attempt to place you in a nursing home against your will, or if there is evidence of elder abuse or undue influence, Stephanie is automatically disinherited. James would still inherit, but any assets that would benefit Stephanie directly would instead go to the charitable foundation Martha established in your names. I let out a long breath, marveling at Martha's foresight and determination. Even from beyond the grave, she was protecting me. Is this legal? I asked. Can she specifically target Stephanie this way? Susan nodded confidently. Martha was careful to structure this to protect James's inheritance, while creating consequences specifically for the behaviors she was concerned about. We documented her reasons thoroughly, including the evidence she collected. It would be very difficult to successfully challenge. Does James know about any of this? No, Susan replied. Martha felt it was important not to come between father and son. The provisions only come into play if Stephanie takes certain actions. If she genuinely cares for James and you, and has no ulterior motives, these provisions will never be activated. I sat back in my chair, processing everything I had learned. Martha had seen the danger Stephanie posed, and had created a safety net I never knew I needed. She had done it quietly, protecting both me and James in the process. What should I do now? I asked Susan. Confront them? Tell James what his wife is planning? Susan considered the question carefully. That depends on what you want the outcome to be. If you confront Stephanie directly, she will likely deny everything and become more careful in her approaches. If you tell James, you risk putting him in an impossible position between his wife and his father. My recommendation, she continued, is that we monitor the situation. Now that you are aware, you can protect yourself from her manipulations. Document any further suspicious behavior. If Stephanie escalates her efforts, or if James seems to be falling under her influence regarding your care, then we can take more direct action. I nodded, seeing the wisdom in her approach. Martha chose well in coming to you, I told her. Susan smiled sadly. Your wife was an exceptional woman, Ralph. She faced her own mortality with grace, while still finding the strength to protect those she loved. I consider it an honor to help fulfill her wishes. As I left Susan's office with copies of Martha's journal and a clear understanding of the legal protections in place, I felt Martha's presence more strongly than at any time since her death. She had not abandoned me to face Stephanie's schemes alone. She had armed me with knowledge and legal safeguards. I drove home with a new sense of purpose. Grief still weighed heavily on me, but it was now accompanied by determination. Stephanie thought she was dealing with a vulnerable old man she could easily manipulate. She had no idea that Martha had seen through her plans and had prepared me for this battle. For the first time since overhearing Stephanie's cruel words at the funeral, I felt a glimmer of hope. Martha had given me the tools to protect myself and our son. Now I needed to use them wisely. In the weeks following my meeting with Susan Williams, Stephanie intensified her campaign. What had been subtle suggestions about retirement communities became direct statements about the necessity of planning for my care. She began bringing brochures for various assisted living facilities, leaving them casually on the coffee table during visits. This one has a wait list of over a year, she mentioned, pointing to a glossy photo of Sunrise Valley Retirement Community. We should really get your name on their list soon, just to keep options open. I played along, examining the brochures with feigned interest, while noting how Stephanie emphasized the facilities that were furthest from our town, effectively isolating me from friends and community if her plan succeeded. James seemed increasingly uncomfortable with Stephanie's pushing, but rarely contradicted her directly. "We just want what is best for you, Dad," he would say, echoing her words in a way that made me wonder how often she rehearsed these conversations with him in private. I decided to test how far Stephanie would go by appearing more physically vulnerable than I actually was. I began moving more slowly when they visited, occasionally forgetting small details of recent conversations and mentioning aches and pains that did not actually trouble me. Stephanie took the bait immediately. During their next visit, I overheard her on the phone in my kitchen, speaking in a hushed voice. "It is happening faster than I expected," she was saying. "He is definitely declining. Memory issues, mobility problems. Yes, I think we can move the timeline up. James is still hesitant, but he will come around when he sees his father cannot manage alone." The performance seemed to accelerate Stephanie's plans. She began stopping by the house alone, often when James was tied up with work. During these visits, she would help by reorganizing my belongings, usually resulting in important items being misplaced. She offered to simplify my finances by adding her name to my accounts, a suggestion I politely declined. "I am managing fine, Stephanie," I told her. James and Martha set everything up very efficiently before she passed. The mention of Martha's name always seemed to irritate Stephanie, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features before she composed herself. Through my neighbor Bill, I learned that Stephanie had been approaching other friends and acquaintances, describing worrying behaviors I had never exhibited and asking if they had noticed similar things. "She told the Johnsons you got lost driving to the grocery store," Bill reported, "and she asked Pastor Michael if he had noticed you seeming confused during Sunday services." Most disturbing was the discovery that Stephanie had scheduled an appointment with a neurologist, supposedly at my request, to evaluate cognitive decline. I found the appointment card in my mail, though I had never discussed such an evaluation with anyone. I contacted Susan Williams immediately, updating her on these developments. She advised me to document everything, while continuing to appear unaware of Stephanie's manipulations. "She is building a case to challenge your competence," Susan explained, "but she is being clumsy about it, which works in our favor. Continue collecting evidence, and be very careful about anything you sign. The situation reached a critical point 3 months after Martha's funeral. I returned from a lunch with Bill to find Stephanie's car in my driveway. She had not mentioned plans to visit that day. Through the living room window, I could see her going through the drawers of Martha's desk, removing papers and photographing documents with her phone. I entered quietly through the kitchen door, moving silently down the hallway until I stood in the living room doorway. Stephanie was so engrossed in her snooping that she did not notice me until I cleared my throat. She startled violently, nearly dropping her phone. "Ralph, I did not hear you come in. I was just looking for that recipe Martha promised me before she passed. For the lemon cake? James has been craving it." The lie was so transparent, it almost would have been comical under different circumstances. Martha had never baked a lemon cake in her life, and her recipe collection was stored in the kitchen, not her desk. "In her financial files?" I asked mildly, nodding toward the bank statements Stephanie had been photographing. "Oh, these were mixed in," she said quickly, attempting to shuffle the papers back into the drawer. "Everything is so disorganized. I was thinking I could help you get things in order." I simply nodded, not confronting her obvious lie. "I appreciate the thought, but I prefer to handle Martha's papers myself. It helps me feel connected to her." Stephanie could hardly argue with that sentiment, though I could see the frustration in her eyes. She made an excuse about another appointment and left quickly. The very next day, James called to say they were coming over that evening to discuss some important matters. The controlled urgency in his voice suggested Stephanie had convinced him it was time to move forward with whatever plan she had concocted. I contacted Susan immediately, who offered to be present for the conversation. I declined, feeling this was something I needed to handle within the family, but I took her advice to record the conversation. James and Stephanie arrived at precisely 7 that evening. Stephanie carried a leather portfolio containing papers, and James looked nervous, avoiding direct eye contact as they settled in the living room. "Dad," James began after an awkward silence, "Stephanie and I have been talking, and we are concerned about you living alone in this big house. It is a lot to maintain, and since Mom passed, what your father needs is specialized care in a supportive environment." Stephanie interrupted, opening her portfolio. "We have found an excellent facility in Arizona with immediate availability." "Arizona?" I asked, feigning surprise. "That is quite far from here. They have the best program for seniors with early cognitive issues," Stephanie continued smoothly. "The climate would be better for your arthritis, too." I did not have arthritis, a fact James would have known if he had been paying attention rather than accepting Stephanie's fabrications. "We have already taken care of all the paperwork." Stephanie pushed a stack of documents toward me. "All you need to do is sign, and we can handle everything else. The movers can come next week for essential items, and we can sell the house and the business to cover the costs." James looked pained, but did not contradict her. I realized with a sinking heart that Stephanie had convinced my son I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. I took the papers and pretended to review them, noting they included not just nursing home admission forms, but also power of attorney documents, giving Stephanie control over all my assets, authorization to sell my property and business, and even a newly drafted, will leaving everything directly to James and Stephanie, bypassing Martha's carefully constructed trust. "This seems very comprehensive," I said carefully. "You have thought of everything. We just want what is best for you," Stephanie said, the practiced concern in her voice sounding hollow now that I knew her true intentions. "And what about what Martha wanted?" I asked quietly. The question seemed to catch both of them off guard. "Mom would want you to be safe and well cared for," James said, finally meeting my eyes. "She certainly would," I agreed. "That is why she took such careful steps to ensure that would happen." Stephanie shifted uneasily in her seat. "What do you mean?" I stood and walked to the bookshelf, retrieving a small voice recorder I had activated when they arrived. "Before I sign anything, there is something you both should hear." I played the recording of Stephanie at Martha's funeral, her cold voice discussing putting me in a nursing home and using my assets for a beach house and luxury car. James's face drained of color as he listened, his eyes darting between me and his wife in disbelief. "Where did you get that?" Stephanie demanded. When the recording ended, her composed facade crumbling. "You were spying on me?" "I accidentally overheard you at Martha's funeral," I replied calmly. "When you were discussing how quickly you could get me out of the way and take what Martha and I spent a lifetime building." James looked stunned. "Steph, tell me that is not you on the recording." Stephanie's strategy shifted instantly. "It is being taken completely out of context. I was upset at the funeral, not thinking clearly. I would never actually do those things." "Then perhaps you can explain these," I continued, producing copies of Martha's journal documenting Stephanie's behavior, the falsified neurologist appointment, and statements from friends about her attempts to create a fictional narrative of my declining health. "Or this," I added, playing another recording, this one from just 2 days earlier when Stephanie had called someone while in my kitchen, discussing how she was accelerating her timeline because I was declining faster than expected. James stood abruptly, his face a mask of horror and betrayal. "You have been planning this all along? While Mom was dying? While Dad was grieving?" "James, you do not understand," Stephanie began, reaching for his arm. "Your father is twisting things, taking normal concerns out of context. Normal concerns do not include lying about his health, searching through his private papers, or discussing which nursing home is furthest from his friends," James responded, pulling away from her touch. "There is one more thing you both should know," I said, opening the file Susan had prepared for me. "Martha suspected Stephanie's intentions long before I did. She met with her own attorney and modified our will specifically to prevent any attempt to force me into a nursing home or take control of our assets." I explained the provisions Martha had put in place, watching Stephanie's expression shift from disbelief to calculation to fury. "That cannot be legal," she snapped. "A will cannot contain conditional clauses targeting specific people." "It absolutely can when there is documented evidence of the behaviors being targeted," I replied. "Martha was very thorough in her documentation, as you have heard, and I have been equally thorough since discovering your plans." James sat heavily on the couch, looking devastated. "I cannot believe this. Stephanie, we talked about helping Dad if he needed it, not forcing him into a facility against his will. We discussed preserving the business, not selling it. You told me these papers were just precautionary measures." Stephanie's composure finally shattered completely. "What was I supposed to do? Wait years for your father to die naturally? We have plans, James. Things we want to do now, not when we are old ourselves. Your parents had their life. They built their wealth. Now it should be our turn." The naked greed in her voice seemed to shock even her, and she quickly tried to backtrack. "I just meant we deserve some happiness too. Is that so wrong?" "The wrong part was lying to me, manipulating my father, and planning to discard him like he meant nothing," James said quietly. "The wrong part was seeing my parents' life work as nothing but a payday for you." The room fell silent. The confrontation I had been preparing for had finally happened, and while I felt vindicated, there was no joy in seeing my son's pain and disillusionment. "I think you should go," I finally said to Stephanie. "James, you are welcome to stay if you want to talk more." Stephanie gathered her papers with shaking hands. "James, are you coming? We need to discuss this privately." James shook his head slowly. "I need time to think. I will get a hotel room tonight." "Do not be ridiculous." Stephanie's voice took on a hard edge. "You are choosing your father's paranoid accusations over your wife?" "I heard your voice on those recordings," James said wearily. "Those were your words, your plans. I need space to process what this means for us." Stephanie looked from James to me, her expression hardening. "This is not over," she said, before storming out of the house, the door slamming behind her. James and I sat in painful silence for several minutes after she left. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes red. "I am so sorry, Dad. I had no idea she was planning all this. I knew she was concerned about you living alone, but I never thought." "I know, son. I said gently. She manipulated both of us. She was very good at making her agenda seem like genuine concern. Mom knew, he said, glancing at Martha's journal on the coffee table. She saw through Stephanie when I could not. Your mother was always a better judge of character than me, I admitted. She tried to protect us both. James stayed for another hour, asking questions about Martha's suspicions and the legal protections she had put in place. He was clearly struggling to reconcile the woman he loved with the person revealed in the recordings and journal entries. When he finally left to check into a hotel, his parting words haunted me. I do not know what happens next, Dad. I just know nothing will ever be the same. I watched him drive away, victory and sadness warring within me. I had protected myself and the legacy Martha and I had built, but at what cost to my relationship with my son? The 2 weeks following the confrontation passed in uncertain silence. James sent a brief text, letting me know he was staying with a college friend while he sorted things out. Stephanie made no attempt to contact me directly, though I learned from my lawyer that she had consulted several attorneys about challenging Martha's will provisions. All had apparently advised her that the documentation Martha had gathered, combined with the evidence I had collected since, made her case essentially unwinnable. I used the quiet period to reconnect with friends I had somewhat neglected during Martha's illness, and after her death, Bill and I resumed our weekly fishing trips. I had lunch with former employees who had become friends over the decades. I even attended a meeting of Martha's book club at their invitation, finding unexpected comfort in hearing stories about my wife from people who had known a side of her I sometimes missed, absorbed as I had been in our business. During this time, several neighbors and friends approached me with information about Stephanie's efforts to build a case against me. My barber told me Stephanie had asked him if I seemed confused during my monthly haircuts. The pharmacist reported that she had inquired about my medications, implying she was helping manage my health issues. Most disturbing was learning from Bill that Stephanie had approached him about being a witness to my supposed incompetence. She offered me $5,000 to sign a statement, saying I had observed concerning behaviors, Bill told me, over coffee. When I refused and told her you were sharp as ever, she suggested my own memory might be compromised by age. These revelations strengthened my resolve while deepening my concern for James. If Stephanie was willing to go to such lengths, what other manipulations had my son endured during their marriage? On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after the confrontation, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find James standing on the porch, soaked from the rain, and looking as though he had aged years in weeks. His eyes were shadowed by dark circles, and he had lost weight. "Dad," he said simply, his voice rough. "Can I come in?" I ushered him inside, offering dry clothes and coffee, which he accepted gratefully. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where Martha, James, and I had shared countless family meals over the years. "I am sorry I disappeared," he began. "I needed time to think, to really look at my marriage and the choices I have made." "You do not owe me an apology, son," I assured him. "This situation is not of your making." James stared into his coffee cup as if it held answers. But I should have seen it. There were signs I ignored because I wanted to believe Stephanie loved me for myself, not for what she thought she could get through me. He looked up, his expression haunted. "After I left here that night, I went to a hotel to think. Stephanie kept calling and texting, alternating between apologies and accusations. I finally turned off my phone and just sat with everything I had learned." James took a deep breath before continuing. "The next day, I went to our apartment to get some clothes. Stephanie was out, and I found myself looking at our life together with new eyes. I noticed her laptop was open on the desk. I have never snooped on her before, but something compelled me to look." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Martha that it made my heart ache. "I found emails, Dad. Years of emails between Stephanie and her friends discussing her investment in marrying me. Jokes about the Anderson retirement plan. Detailed discussions about how to accelerate getting access to your and Mom's assets." The pain in his voice was palpable. The most recent emails were about consulting lawyers to challenge Mom's will provisions. She was looking into claiming Mom was not of sound mind when she made those changes. I reached across the table to grasp his hand. "James, I'm so sorry." "There was more," he continued, his voice hollow. "I found evidence of gambling debts, secret credit cards, with massive balances. Stephanie has been living far beyond our means for years, counting on eventually getting access to your money to cover her tracks." This new information made Stephanie's aggressive timeline suddenly make more sense. She had not just been greedy for luxury, she had been desperate to cover mounting debts before they caught up with her. "What did you do?" I asked. I confronted her when she came home. It was ugly. James winced at the memory. She denied everything at first, then tried to justify it, saying I had promised her a certain lifestyle that my salary could not provide. When I told her I wanted a divorce, she threatened to destroy me professionally. James took another sip of coffee, his hand slightly shaking. I moved out that night, staying with my friend Eric. The next morning, I contacted a divorce attorney and froze our joint accounts after finding Stephanie had begun transferring funds. I listened as James detailed the painful weeks that followed. Stephanie had alternated between threatening him and begging for reconciliation. When both approaches failed, she had begun spreading rumors among their professional colleagues that James had abused her. Allegations, his attorney assured him, would not stand up to scrutiny, but that were deeply painful nonetheless. The most difficult part, James admitted, was accepting that our entire relationship may have been based on her calculation rather than love. I keep replaying moments, wondering if any of it was real. I asked myself the same questions about missing the signs, I told him. Your mother saw what we could not. James nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. Mom always could see through people. Remember how she knew immediately that my high school girlfriend was cheating on me, months before I found out? The shared memory created a small bridge between us. For the next hour, we talked about Martha, sharing stories, and remembering her insight and quiet strength. It felt healing for both of us to celebrate her memory together. I keep thinking about how Mom protected us, even when she was dying, James said eventually. She must have been in such pain, yet she was still looking ahead, still trying to take care of us. That was who she was, I agreed. Always putting family first. James looked around the kitchen, his gaze settling on the small herb garden Martha had maintained on the windowsill, which I had continued caring for after her death. I have been so lost these past weeks, he admitted. My marriage is ending. My professional reputation is under attack, and I feel like such a fool for not seeing Stephanie clearly. You are not a fool, son. You trusted and loved. There is no shame in that. What I cannot understand is why Mom never told you her suspicions, James said. You two shared everything. I considered the question, remembering Martha's letter. I think she was trying to protect our relationship with you. If she had voiced her concerns, and we had confronted Stephanie together, it might have forced you to choose sides before you were ready to see the truth for yourself. James nodded slowly. She was giving me the chance to figure it out on my own, and protecting me from having to make that impossible choice between supporting you and acting on her suspicions, I added. We sat in contemplative silence, the sound of rain on the roof, creating a peaceful backdrop to our reconciliation. Dad, James said finally, would it be all right if I stayed here for a while? Just until I get things sorted with the divorce and find a new place? The request brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This is your home, James. It always will be. That evening, as James settled into his old bedroom, I stood in the doorway of the room Martha and I had shared for 30 years. You were right, my love, I whispered to her memory. About everything. Thank you for protecting us both. As I turned to go, I felt, just for a moment, the faintest touch on my shoulder, as if Martha's hand had reached across the divide to offer one more gesture of comfort. Whether real or imagined, it brought me peace. 6 months after that rainy afternoon when James returned home, our lives had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated in the dark days following Martha's funeral. The divorce between James and Stephanie was finalized with surprising speed, once evidence of her financial deceptions came to light. Her attempts to contest Martha's will provisions failed spectacularly, with the judge particularly troubled by the recordings and documentation of her systematic attempts to have me declared incompetent. James stayed with me for 4 months before finding a small house not far from mine. During that time, our relationship healed and deepened as we processed our shared grief and betrayal. We established new routines, cooking dinner together twice a week, watching old movies Martha had loved, and gradually finding our way to laughter again. My grief for Martha remained, transforming slowly from the sharp, constant pain of early loss to a gentler ache colored increasingly by gratitude for the life we shared. I still spoke to her sometimes when alone, updating her on our progress and thanking her for her foresight. "You saved us both, Martha," I told her photograph one evening. "James and me. You saw what we could not, and put protections in place that gave us time to discover the truth ourselves." With Susan Williams' help, I established the Martha Anderson Memorial Foundation, using a portion of our savings to create programs supporting seniors vulnerable to elder abuse and financial exploitation. James contributed his legal expertise, providing free seminars on how older adults could protect themselves from the very tactics Stephanie had attempted to use against me. The foundation became a healing project for us both. James found purpose in helping others avoid similar situations, while I discovered that sharing Martha's wisdom and foresight kept her spirit alive in meaningful ways. I also returned to Anderson Construction part-time, not because I needed to work, but because I missed the satisfaction of building things that would last. I focused on mentoring younger employees, passing on the values of quality and integrity that had guided Martha and me throughout our careers. One unexpected blessing emerged from this painful chapter. Through the foundation work, James met Allison, a social worker specializing in elder care. Unlike Stephanie, whose interest in seniors had been purely predatory, Allison had genuine compassion for older adults and a fierce dedication to protecting their dignity and independence. James approached this new relationship with appropriate caution, but I could see the authentic connection between them. When he brought Allison to dinner at my house, I observed how she listened attentively to his stories about Martha, asked thoughtful questions about my construction projects, and never once glanced around assessing the value of our possessions. "Mom would have liked her," James said as we washed dishes after one such dinner. "She would," I agreed, noticing how the mention of Martha now brought smiles more often than tears. Perhaps the most profound change was in my understanding of wealth and inheritance. Martha and I had spent decades building financial security, growing our business, and investing wisely. We had always seen these efforts as creating a legacy for James. Now I recognized that the most valuable inheritance we had given our son had nothing to do with money. "The real inheritance your mother left was not in bank accounts or property," I told James one evening as we sat on the porch swing Martha had loved. "It was her wisdom, her foresight, her ability to see people clearly without becoming cynical, and most of all, her unwavering love that continued to protect us even after she was gone." James nodded, his eyes reflecting the sunset. "I think about that all the time now. When I am working with clients at the foundation, I try to approach them with Mom's combination of clear seeing and compassion. In the quiet moments alone, I often reflected on the journey from that devastating moment at Martha's funeral to the healing and purpose I had found. The path had been painful, revealing betrayal from someone we had welcomed into our family and testing the bond between father and son. Yet through that fire, something stronger had emerged. Martha's journals, which had provided such crucial evidence against Stephanie's schemes, now offered me comfort in a different way. Reading her observations about our life together, I discovered new dimensions to the woman I had loved for 45 years. Her final gift to me was this deeper understanding of her quiet strength and wisdom. I kept her last journal entry framed on my bedside table, written just days before she passed. When her hand was shaky, but her mind still sharp, it read, "The measure of a life well lived is not in what you accumulate, but in what you protect. I have tried to protect love, integrity, and truth. If I have succeeded even a little in this, then I can go peacefully. Martha had succeeded beyond measure. Her love continued to protect us. Her integrity had guided our response to betrayal, and her commitment to truth had illuminated a path forward when darkness threatened to overwhelm us. As I look back on this chapter of my life, I realize that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most painful packages. Without Stephanie's betrayal, I might never have discovered the depth of Martha's love and foresight. Without that moment of overhearing cruel words at a funeral, James might have remained blind to his wife's true nature until it was too late. The lesson I carry forward is to trust my instincts as Martha did, to look beneath surface appearances to the truth beneath, and to protect those I love, not just with my presence, but with my foresight. This wisdom serves me daily as I navigate my new life, helping me distinguish between genuine connections and potential exploitation. What inheritance will you leave for those you love? Will it be merely money and possessions, or will it include the wisdom to use those resources wisely? Will it include protection that extends beyond your lifetime? These are questions worth considering before it is too late. If this story has touched you, please share it with someone who might benefit from Martha's example. Subscribe for more life lessons from my journey, and leave a comment about how you are protecting your loved ones for the future. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to see clearly and act with love, just as my Martha did.